How can a quiet, middle-aged model engineer with no wealth, no superpowers, and absolutely no military background become one of the greatest heroes in 20th century fiction?
I mean, it's a phenomenal question, right? Because when we think of a hero embarking on some sort of global quest, we almost reflexively picture someone with, a certain inherent swagger.
Yeah, exactly. Like you expect James Bond.
Right, or at least some swashbuckling Indiana Jones type. You expect someone who instinctively runs toward the gunfire.
Right, someone who thrives on the adrenaline. But today, we're diving deep into a beautifully understated story. We're specifically looking at the brilliant BBC Saturday Night Theatre radio adaptation of Nevil Shute's classic novel, Trustee from the Toolroom.
Which is just a masterpiece.
It really is. And our hero, a man named Keith Stewart, well, he couldn't be further from that traditional archetype.
No, not at all. Keith Stewart is, by all outward appearances, just the most ordinary man in England.
Just a completely average guy.
Yeah. And to really understand Keith, you have to understand the mind that created him. Because Nevil Shute wasn't just some novelist who decided to write about an engineer.
Yeah.
He was, first and foremost, a highly accomplished aeronautical engineer himself.
Wait, really? I mean, I knew he wrote A Town Like Allison on the beach, but I didn't realize he actually worked in aviation.
Oh, extensively. Yeah, his full name was Nevil Shute Norway, and he actually published under his first two names, Nevil Shute, specifically to protect his engineering career.
Oh, wow. So he was worried about his reputation.
Exactly. He wanted to avoid any potential embarrassment or, lack of gravity associated with being a quote-unquote fiction writer.
That's so funny. I can't let the other engineers know I make up stories.
Right. But it makes sense for the time. In the 1920s and 30s, he worked as a stress engineer on the R-100 airship project.
Oh, wow. Airships.
Yeah, under the legendary Barnes Wallis. And this was a time when aeronautical engineering was literally a matter of life and death.
Yeah, margins of error were pretty slim back then.
Non-existent. I mean, you made a calculation, and if you were wrong, the airship crashed and people died.
That puts an entirely different spin on his writing, doesn't it? It's not just a backdrop. It's like a whole worldview.
Exactly. Engineering shaped every single one of his novels. He eventually even founded his own aircraft manufacturing company, Airspeed Limited.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, and later in life, he moved to Australia, which heavily influenced his later works. But Trustee from the Toolroom is just deeply special.
He was one of his last, right?
Yeah, it was published in 1960, shortly after Shute's death. And for a lot of readers and critics, it really feels like his literary farewell.
Like his final statement.
Right, his final testament to the values he held dearest. Things like craftsmanship, quiet competence, and, just the absolute dignity of ordinary work.
And those values are just perfectly embodied in Keith Stewart. So, okay, let's unpack this and set the stage here.
Let's do it.
So, Keith is a fitter. He lives in Ealing, which in the 1950s is this perfectly respectable, quiet, maybe slightly gray suburb of London.
Yeah, let's actually pause on that word for a second. Fitter.
Okay, yeah.
Because in the context of mid-century British engineering, a fitter is not just some general mechanic.
Right, it's a specific title.
Exactly. A fitter is a highly skilled tradesman. So after parts come off a lathe or a milling machine, it is the fitter who uses hand tools, files, scrapers, emery cloth to actually mate those parts together.
With microscopic tolerances.
Yes. Microscopic, they literally fit the machine together. It requires just an unfathomable level of patience and manual precision.
Okay, that makes total sense. So his entire world basically revolves around his modest workshop, his tool room.
His sanctuary.
Yeah, exactly. And in this tool room, he makes these tiny, immaculate working models of engines and clocks. And on top of that, he writes these meticulous serialized articles about how to build these things.
Right, for a magazine called Miniature Mechanic.
Yes, Miniature Mechanic. And yet, this man whose life is defined by the absolute predictability of micrometers and, the quiet hum of a watchmaker's lathe.
He's about to have his entire world completely upended.
Yeah, by a profoundly heavy call to duty.
It really is.
So let's get into the mechanics of how this quiet life gets so derailed. To understand the stakes, we have to look at Keith's family.
The Dermots.
Right. Keith has a sister, Jo, and she is married to a man named John Dermot.
And John is a completely different kind of guy.
Oh, totally. John is a former Navy officer, recently let go from the service due to post-war downsizing. And he is very much a man of action.
A restless spirit.
Exactly. So John and Jo are planning this massive, romantic, and frankly, somewhat reckless voyage across the Pacific to Vancouver.
in a tiny boat.
Right, they're sailing in a small 28-foot wooden yacht called the Shearwater.
Now, it's important to note for you listening that this isn't just an extended vacation.
No, it's a permanent relocation. They want to start a completely new life in Canada.
But there's a massive logistical and legal complication here, and it's one rooted very deeply in the historical reality of post-war Britain.
Right, this is where the socioeconomic context of the 1950s really kicks in. The UK was effectively bankrupt after World War II.
Precisely. Because of the enormous debts accrued during the war, especially the Lend-Lease agreements, Britain enacted the Exchange Control Act of 1947.
And what did that actually do?
Well, the government strictly limited how much capital a person could transfer out of the country, especially to a quote-unquote dollar area like North America.
Oh, to prevent the total collapse of the British pound, right?
Exactly. If you wanted to emigrate, you couldn't just wire your life savings to a Canadian bank. It was illegal. You were allowed to take only a very small, heavily regulated amount of cash out of the country.
Which puts John Dermott in a terrible bind.
A huge bind.
He has some money, but under the law, he just can't take it with him to start this new life. So he makes a drastic illegal decision.
The inciting secret.
Yes. He secretly liquidates almost all of his assets, which is around 27,000 pounds, and he buys diamonds.
Which, I mean, from a smuggling perspective, diamonds are the perfect medium of exchange.
Oh, absolutely. They're universally valuable, they're inflation-proof, and they are completely untraceable.
And most importantly, they are easily concealed. But John still faces a severe physical problem.
He's got to hide them.
Right. He needs a place to hide a fortune in diamonds on a small wooden yacht where customs officials won't find them.
And where the seawater won't ruin them.
Yes. The highly corrosive seawater in the bilge. They have to survive a months-long Pacific crossing.
So who do you turn to when you need a custom-engineered, watertight, totally undetectable hiding place?
You go to your brother-in-law.
You go to the master fitter with a workshop in his back garden.
The way Shute writes this interaction is fascinating because it establishes the literal toolroom connection that forms the catalyst for the entire narrative.
Right. John comes to Keith's workshop with this little red leather jewel case.
And he doesn't just ask Keith to hide it, he asks him to engineer a permanent solution.
I love the technical detail here because Keith doesn't just, throw it in a Tupperware container and call it a day.
No, he applies his trademark practical logic.
He decides to enclose the leather case inside a custom copper box. But hold on, I actually have a question about this part.
Sure, yeah.
Because in the story, it specifically says Keith brazes the copper box shut. Why does he braze it? If this thing's going to be submerged in the oily, wet hull of a boat for months, wouldn't welding it be way stronger and more secure?
Oh, that is exactly the kind of detail that Shute, as an aeronautical engineer, gets so right. And it highlights Keith's specific expertise.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Welding and brazing are fundamentally different processes. If Keith had tried to arc weld that copper box, the heat required to melt the base copper, you're talking over 1,000 degrees Celsius.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that heat would have conducted straight through the metal and instantly incinerated the red leather case inside.
And probably damaged the diamonds through thermal shock.
Exactly, because welding actually melts the base metal itself to form the joint. Brazing, on the other hand, uses a filler metal, like a brass alloy that has a lower melting point than the copper. So you heat the joint, and the molten filler is drawn into the microscopic gap by capillary action.
Capillary action, that's brilliant.
Right. It creates a watertight seal without turning the entire box into a literal oven.
Wow. But even with brazing, Keith knows the heat of the oxyacetylene torch is still a risk, right?
Yes, so he leaves just enough room inside the copper box for asbestos card packing.
Because asbestos is an incredible thermal insulator.
Exactly. It traps the air and stops the conductive heat of the torch from ever reaching the leather.
It's like you're building a miniature thermal vault.
He really is.
Right.
And then he takes this watertight copper box and he embeds it into a block of wet concrete right down in the bilge of the shearwater.
Just hides it in plain sight.
Right. He explains to John that once the concrete sets, it will look completely natural. The bilge of a wooden sailing yacht usually has concrete or lead ballast in it anyway.
It'll just get covered in oil and grime.
Exactly, becoming entirely invisible to customs inspectors. And when they finally reach Vancouver, John can just tap the concrete with a hammer to find the hollow spot and chip it out with a cold chisel.
It's such an elegant solution. It's permanent, it's secure, and it relies on the absolute predictability of materials.
Which is very Keith.
Very Keith. But this mechanical favor, as ingenious as it is completely overshadowed by a much larger, deeply personal favor the Dermots ask of Keith and his wife, Katie.
Yeah, this is the emotional engine of the whole story.
Because John and Joe are leaving their 10-year-old daughter, Janice, behind in England.
Right, the plan is for Janice to stay with Keith and Katie in Ealing for 6 months. Once John and Joe have crossed the Pacific and actually established themselves in Canada, they'll fly Janice out to join them.
And listening to the radio adaptation, you really hear the stark contrast in lifestyles between these two couples.
Oh, the audio really highlights it.
Yeah. Joe, the adventurous sister, casually talks about sailing through the Panama Canal, navigating to the Galapagos, Tahiti, Honolulu, these incredibly exotic, dangerous locales.
And meanwhile, Katie, Keith's wife, is listening to this and is just terrified.
Terrified by the sheer logistics of it. She talks about the horror of trying to cook a meal on a Primus stove while a boat is pitching and violently rocking in the middle of the ocean.
They are fundamentally different species of people.
They really are. The Dermots seek the horizon, and the Stewarts seek the comfort of a nice cup of tea.
And the safety of a predictable routine. But the unifying factor here is their love for Janice.
Yeah.
Keith and Katie couldn't have children of their own, which brings this very quiet, underlying sorrow to their domestic life.
You really feel that in this story.
You do. So they take Janice in with open arms. They absolutely adore her. Keith makes her little wooden toys on his lathe.
I love that detail.
Right. There's this beautiful moment where he makes a tiny, perfectly proportioned wooden egg for her plastic duck.
It's just so domestic and cozy. It is the sanctuary of the tool room applied to family life.
Safe and warm.
Until the telegram arrives.
The inciting incident.
And the way the BBC Saturday Night Theatre adaptation handles this transition is just devastating.
It really is brilliant audio production because the shearwater is caught in a catastrophic hurricane in the Tuamotu archipelago.
Which is this remote string of coral atolls in the South Pacific near Tahiti.
Right. And the yacht is driven onto a jagged reef off an uninhabited island called Marota. John and Joe are drowned.
The sound design on the radio play here is phenomenal. Radio drama, especially those classic BBC productions, creates such an incredible sense of space in your mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have this roaring, chaotic, terrifying sequence of the storm. You hear the wind howling, the wood splintering, John desperately telling Joe to go below deck, promising her they'll survive. It's sheer visceral terror.
And then,
smash cut to Ealing.
It is so jarring.
So jarring. You go from the deafening roar of the Pacific to the high-pitched, steady, comforting buzz of Keith's Blee watchmaker's lathe.
He is literally in his workshop, turning a tiny piston, finishing that little wooden duck egg for Janice.
And then the knock at the door, and the news from the governor of Papeete.
It's the ultimate juxtaposition, isn't it? The chaotic, lethal, completely indifferent power of nature crashing against the ordered, safe, meticulously controlled miniature world Keith has built.
It's heartbreaking. And instantly, Keith isn't just the fun uncle anymore. He is Janice's legal trustee.
Which forces him to go to the office of Mr. Carpenter, the solicitor handling John's estate. And this is where the trap truly springs on Keith.
Oh, the trap. Because John's diamond smuggling was a total secret, official records show almost nothing of his wealth.
Right, the government just thinks he took the legally mandated pittance out of the country.
So Mr. Carpenter informs Keith that John's official bank accounts hold a grand total of $55.06 and 9 pence.
Let's put that in perspective for a modern audience, because it's important. 55 pounds in the 1950s wasn't nothing, but in the context of raising a child, it is absolute financial ruin.
Right, this 10-year-old girl is effectively penniless.
And this is where the crisis hits the Stewarts, because Keith and Katie are a working-class couple.
Very modest income.
Yeah, derived mainly from Keith's freelance writing for Miniature Mechanic. So they sit down, they do the math, and they realize immediately that by the end of April, they won't even be able to afford Janice's middle school fees.
Which means they face the agonizing prospect of having to hand Janice over to John's wealthy, somewhat pompous relatives in Northern Ireland.
People who Joe explicitly stated she did not want raising her daughter.
Right, so Keith has this terrifying realization. The 27,000 pounds, which is Janice's entire future, is sitting in a block of concrete, underwater, on a coral reef 10,000 miles away.
A literal buried treasure.
But, okay, I have to push back a little on the realism of what happens next because it feels a bit absurd.
How so?
Well, Keith doesn't deliver a grand monologue about destiny. He doesn't swear a blood oath. He goes home, talks to his wife, and Katie checks their postal savings book. She says, we could spare 110 pounds.
Yes.
And Keith just decides, well, I suppose I have to go to the South Pacific. Wait, hold on. 110 pounds. Even in the 1950s, that couldn't possibly cover commercial airfare to Tahiti.
Not even close.
Was he completely delusional about the cost of international travel?
It sounds delusional to us, definitely, but it actually perfectly illustrates Keith's mindset. He isn't ignorant of the costs. He knows 110 pounds isn't enough to buy a direct ticket.
So what's his plan?
Well, Keith approaches this global, seemingly insurmountable crisis exactly the same way he approaches a malfunctioning carburetor on a model engine.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. He doesn't panic. He assesses the available resources, 110 pounds. He identifies the objective, retrieve the jewels to secure his niece's future, and place a proper headstone on his sister's grave.
And then he just begins to methodically work out the mechanics of the first step.
Exactly. It is the absolute antithesis of the typical hero's journey.
There are no hysterics.
None. He is driven entirely by duty, practical intelligence, and, honestly, the desperate need to pay school tuition fees.
Which is so relatable. You look at typical fictional heroes, and they are driven by glory, adrenaline, or some epic battle between good and evil. Keith is driven by basic, boring human decency.
I'd argue boring is the wrong word, though. It's grounded. And it sets up the central narrative tension perfectly.
Because you're wondering how he's going to do it.
Exactly. How on earth does a man with 110 pounds, zero travel experience, and a thoroughly domestic background cross the globe to an uninhabited coral reef?
Right. The logistical gap is massive.
Yeah.
And the mechanism he uses to cross that gap is what elevates this story into a masterpiece, really.
I agree completely.
Because the answer is his craft. Which brings us to the underlying philosophy of the story, something I know modern engineers absolutely love about this book and the radio play.
The philosophy of the toolroom.
Yes. The idea that engineering is not just a technical skill, it is a profound moral virtue.
This is undoubtedly the most resonant theme in Shute's work. In Keith's world, the toolroom isn't just a place where you cut metal and get your hands dirty.
All right.
It's a place where character is forged and tested. Think about the specific models the story mentions Keith making. A miniature generator set running on ether-rich American fuel.
Miniature Hornet engine.
And most famously, a Congreve clock. Building these things requires an unfathomable level of precision and patience.
Let's actually talk about the Congreve clock for a second because the radio play references it, and it is just a beast of a machine.
It's incredibly complex.
For those listening who don't know, a Congreve rolling ball clock doesn't use a standard pendulum. It uses a small metal ball rolling back and forth along a zigzag track on a brass table.
Right, and as the ball hits the end of the track, it triggers the escapement, the table tilts, the hands advance, and the ball rolls back the other way.
It is notoriously difficult to build and incredibly finicky to balance. Like dust, temperature changes, a microscopic burr on the track, anything will throw it off.
You can't fake a Congreve clock. It either keeps time or it doesn't.
Exactly. There's no bluffing in the toolroom.
No, you cannot negotiate with a piece of steel. You cannot charm a microscopic gear into meshing if the math is wrong. Engineering demands absolute unflinching honesty.
If your measurements are off by a fraction of a millimeter, the engine won't run. Period.
Period. So Keith's entire life has trained him to face physical reality exactly as it is, without illusion, without ego, and to work diligently until the problem is solved.
So his physical actions in the workshop directly reflect his internal morality. Just as he would never leave a rough burr on a machine part, he cannot leave his niece's future unresolved.
It's an unfinished job. The tolerances are wrong. He has to fix it.
He just has to. Do you think this could actually be the greatest story ever written about engineers?
Honestly. Many people argue that it is, precisely because it elevates the profession from mere mechanics to a philosophical worldview. We can even draw a fascinating parallel between Keith's analog toolroom in the 1950s and today's digital maker movement.
Oh, absolutely. Today we have CNC routing, 3D printing, Raspberry Pi, open source robotics communities. The tools are completely different.
The tools have evolved drastically, yes, but the core satisfaction, the joy of taking raw materials, solving a complex physical problem, building something precisely, and most importantly, sharing that knowledge with a wider community that remains entirely timeless.
And Keith writes these highly detailed articles for Miniature Mechanic. He answers letters from strangers all over the world who are stuck on their own builds.
Right. He doesn't hoard his knowledge as intellectual property. He distributes it freely, driven by a pure love for the craft.
He is like the ultimate ideal forum moderator on Reddit or Stack Exchange.
That's a great comparison.
He's the guy who patiently answers the same beginner questions, provides detailed schematics, and never makes anyone feel stupid for asking.
And this is where the plot turns.
Yes, because that isolated craftsmanship, that quiet dedication to answering letters from hobbyists, translates into the real world in a massive, totally unexpected way.
It builds an invisible global safety net around Keith.
This is how he gets out of England with only 110 pounds. He relies on the worldwide brotherhood of makers.
It is the ultimate 6 degrees of separation, but specifically for nerds who build tiny engines.
I love it. Let's trace this chain, because it's brilliant. It begins with a man named Oliver Thorne.
Yeah.
Keith knows him locally from the Ealing and District Model Exhibition. Oliver is a model train fanatic. But Oliver also works for Albatross Airways.
Which is very convenient.
Exactly. When Keith casually mentions he needs to get to the Pacific, Oliver connects him to Captain Fielding.
Now, Captain Fielding is the chief pilot of Albatross Airways. He's described as a fire eater, a really tough, no-nonsense aviation veteran.
And he's scheduled to fly a DC-6B freighter to Honolulu carrying a massive generator rotor.
So Keith goes to see Fielding at the hangar, but he doesn't go empty-handed.
No, he brings a model engine he built for research. And when he gets there, the airline mechanics are actually struggling to get their own auxiliary engine started on the tarmac.
And Keith just pulls out his miniature engine and it fires up immediately.
But wait, I have to ask, why does Keith's toy engine firing up convince a veteran pilot to let a civilian hitchhike on a cargo flight? What is the actual mechanical translation there?
It's the universal language of competence. Fielding is a professional pilot. His life literally depends on mechanics knowing their trade.
Okay, that makes sense.
When he sees Keith, a man who can build a functioning internal combustion engine small enough to hold in one hand, an engine that runs flawlessly while the commercial mechanics are fumbling,
He instantly recognizes a master craftsman.
he doesn't see a guy playing with toys. He sees a man who understands thermodynamics, compression, and fuel mixtures on a molecular level.
Wow.
So Fielding just bypasses all the corporate red tape. He looks at Keith and says, "Get your passport and visa. You're coming with us."
Just like that. A free flight to Honolulu, because game recognizes game.
Precisely.
That is fantastic. So that free flight gets him to Hawaii. But Honolulu is still 2,500 seas miles away from Tahiti.
He's still stranded.
Yeah. Once there, Keith needs another miracle. Through the company receiving the generator rotor, he meets the crew of a tanker called the Cathay Princess. Specifically, he meets Captain Davis and the third officer, Alec Bourne.
And in a massive stroke of luck, Alec Bourne is obsessed with Keith's model Hornet engine design.
Small world.
Bourne actually built one based on Keith's articles in Miniature Mechanic, but Bourne is having trouble getting it to run properly.
Oh, this part is crazy.
Yeah.
He actually had to use the ship's massive main engine lathe to act as a starter motor because his fuel mixture was wrong.
Right, and Keith just listens to the problem and casually gives him a tip about using ether-rich American fuel and washing the microscopic cylinder with light oil.
Okay, another technical question for you.
Well,
Why ether-rich fuel? What does that actually do for a miniature engine?
well, these miniature model engines don't have spark plugs.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they are compression ignition engines, functioning somewhat like a diesel engine. You compress the air-fuel mixture until the heat of compression causes it to ignite.
Okay, got it.
Ether has a very low auto-ignition temperature and a very wide flammability limit. If you have a tiny, finicky engine that won't start, adding ether to the fuel mix means it will ignite much more easily under lower compression.
And Keith just knows this chemistry off the top of his head.
He diagnoses the ignition failure instantly.
It's a tiny technical exchange, but the sociological impact on that ship is huge.
Oh, massive.
Captain Davis tells Keith that his model engine designs have practically saved his crew. Instead of going ashore in every port, getting drunk, getting into fights, and getting arrested.
Half the crew spends their free time in the ship's engine room, quietly filing metal and building models.
It's amazing. Davis tells Keith, "No man who does that is a stranger in my ship."
It shows the sheer, unexpected scale of this fellowship. Keith genuinely doesn't realize it, but he is an international celebrity within this fiercely loyal subculture.
But the most spectacular intervention comes from the very top of this subculture, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
While Keith is literally hitchhiking his way across the Pacific, his editor back in London, a man named Mr. McNeil, is terrified.
He thinks his star writer is going to get himself killed on a coral reef.
So McNeil contacts an American fan of Keith's, Professor O'Leary, a professor of medieval literature at Ann Arbor University in Michigan.
I always loved that detail. A medieval literature professor spending his evenings building model traction engines.
Right. It perfectly illustrates how this hobby cuts across all professional boundaries.
So O'Leary immediately hits his Rolodex and reaches out to a man named Solomon P. Herzone.
Solomon P. Herzone. This guy is the ultimate deus ex machina, but he's totally earned. He is a multi-millionaire lumber and shipping tycoon based in Washington state.
And his motivation for helping Keith is deeply, painfully personal.
Because Herzone had suffered a severe psychological and physical health crisis, right?
Yeah, a complete nervous breakdown from the stress of running his empire. His doctors ordered him to acquire an absorbing hobby to save his sanity.
And he chose model engineering.
Specifically, he chose to build the notoriously difficult Congreve rolling ball clock that Keith had designed.
Wow. And as Herzone explains, whenever he got stuck, whenever the ball wouldn't roll right or the escapement jammed, he would write a letter to this complete stranger in England, Keith Stewart.
And Keith would reply by return of post with lucid, friendly, infinitely patient instructions.
Herzone explicitly credits Keith's letters with literally saving his mind and his life.
So when Herzone hears that the man who saved him is stranded in the Pacific on a desperate mission, he doesn't hesitate for a second.
He acts with the sweeping, terrifying power of a tycoon.
He orders his business partner, Chuck Ferris, who happens to have a luxury mega yacht called the Flying Cloud currently cruising near Honolulu, to drop absolutely everything.
The instructions Herzone gives are amazing. He basically radios the yacht and says, divert your course, follow this man's route. If he's shipwrecked, visit every single island in the Pacific until you find him.
Put the yacht entirely at his disposal.
It's incredible. It really reminds me of how modern niche communities operate. In the real world, a Washington lumber billionaire and an Ealing fitter would never, ever cross paths.
Never.
But in the tool room, they are absolute equals. They speak the same language of micrometers and brass.
It is a beautiful illustration of how competence and generosity transcend class and geography.
But of course, there's a catch.
There's always a catch.
Keith doesn't know the billionaire's luxury yacht is coming to rescue him. He is still stuck in Honolulu, and he can't find a commercial ship going to Tahiti.
So he ends up taking passage on a boat called the Mary Bell, captained by a man named Jack Donnelly.
Ah, the odd couple of the Pacific. This might be my favorite section of the entire story, because Jack Donnelly is a fascinating, complex character.
He really is. He's described as a half-Yank, half-Polynesian fisherman. By conventional standards, the authorities in Honolulu think he's completely mad.
Right. His boat, the Mary Bell, is a sloop-rigged fishing boat that he built himself.
But the crucial detail is that the Mary Bell has no engine.
No engine at all.
And Jack has absolutely no modern navigational tools. He has no sextant, no chronometer, no proper admiralty charts.
He has an old, clapped-out ex-war surplus compass.
Yeah.
And he has a child's school atlas with the entire Pacific Ocean printed on one filthy, generalized page.
And yet, he somehow sailed this boat single-handed from Oregon to Hawaii.
The story says he did it by tooling along behind commercial airplanes. He literally memorized the flight schedules out of San Francisco and just followed the contrails in the sky until he hit Hawaii.
It is absolute madness.
But it works. And this dynamic between Keith and Jack is a brilliant juxtaposition. You have two totally different types of competence colliding in a tiny wooden boat in the middle of the ocean.
Let's break down that collision, because Keith represents mathematical, scientific precision.
Right. Before Keith left Honolulu, Captain Davis of the Cathay Princess actually gifted Keith a high-quality sextant, a nautical almanac, and proper charts.
And had his navigator teach Keith how to take a meridian latitude sight.
Exactly. So Keith comes aboard the Mary Bell ready to shoot the sun, carefully log data, calculate their speed, and plot their course on a grid.
And Jack. Jack navigates by dead reckoning, a skill taught to him by his father through an oral instinctual tradition.
I've heard the term dead reckoning in movies, but how does that actually work mathematically if you don't have a GPS or a sextant to confirm your position?
Dead reckoning is essentially calculating your current position based on a previously known position, factoring in your estimated speed, elapsed time, and course.
Okay.
The math is basic distance equals speed multiplied by time, but the execution is incredibly difficult.
I can imagine.
You have to estimate your speed through the water, perhaps by tossing a piece of wood overboard and counting how many seconds it takes to pass the length of the hull. Then you have to maintain a strict compass heading.
And what about the wind and currents?
That's the real danger. You have to estimate leeway how much the ocean currents and the wind are pushing you sideways off your compass heading.
Oh, wow.
If your estimates are off by even a fraction of a knot over weeks at sea, that error compounds, and you miss your island by hundreds of miles.
And Jack literally writes his estimated daily mileage in pencil on the wooden bulkhead of the cabin.
But when Keith gets a sextant out and starts checking Jack's rudimentary math against the actual distance from San Francisco to Honolulu, what does he find?
He finds that Jack's error rate over a blind voyage of more than 2,000 miles is only 3%.
Only 3%.
I have to push back on Shute here. Is that actually possible, or is that just romanticizing the noble savage trope?
It's highly improbable for a novice, certainly. But for a master mariner deeply attuned to the water, it is possible. Polynesian navigators historically crossed vast stretches of the Pacific using even fewer tools, reading wave patterns, star paths, and water temperature.
So Jack represents a fragment of that instinctual natural mastery. It totally blows Keith's mind. And later in the voyage, there's that great scene where Jack correctly identifies that they are nearing land, not by looking at Keith's charts, but by observing a frigate bird.
Yes. He knows the specific habits of the bird. He knows that it flies out to sea to hunt during the day, but it always returns to land to roost at night.
Jack observes the bird's flight path, estimates his airspeed, looks at the time until sunset, and accurately predicts that land is 40 or 50 miles to the east.
Which forces us to ask how we value different types of knowledge. Jack's knowledge is deeply connected to observing nature. Keith's knowledge is rooted in the scientific method and mathematical abstraction.
And what I absolutely love about Keith Stewart is that he doesn't look down on Jack for a second.
No, not at all.
A lesser, more arrogant character would have flashed his shiny new sextant, mocked the child's atlas, and tried to take over the ship. But Keith treats Jack with absolute respect.
He recognizes that Jack's methods, while unorthodox and undocumented, achieve undeniable results.
That mutual respect becomes the foundation of their friendship. Keith even shares his ultimate treasure with Jack. He had brought his prized miniature generator on board the tiny one running on ether fuel.
And they run it every day. It makes a tiny, buzzing bit of electricity in the middle of the vast, silent ocean, and it brings them both immense, childlike joy.
It makes me wonder, why is it that in fiction, competence is often portrayed as boring? We usually demand characters who make terrible emotional mistakes to drive the plot forward.
Right.
But here, listening to two guys just calmly figure out navigation, discuss the flight speed of frigate birds, and run a tiny generator is completely riveting. Why does that work?
Because competence, when it is applied to a high-stakes survival situation, is inherently dramatic. It's the drama of human ingenuity trying to overcome the massive, indifferent chaos of the natural world.
That's a really profound point. There's a deep psychological satisfaction in seeing a problem approached logically and solved elegantly.
We enjoy watching skilled people work.
We really do. And they do solve it. They painstakingly make their way across the Pacific. But their grueling, analog, man-against-nature journey is suddenly interrupted. The cavalry arrives.
The Flying Cloud.
Yes. Chuck Ferris's massive luxury yacht, sent by the millionaire Herzone, finally tracks them down in the middle of the ocean.
Imagine the surreal nature of that scene. You have been in a tiny, engineless wooden fishing boat for weeks, thousands of miles from civilization, smelling of salt and sweat.
Yeah.
And suddenly, a multi-million-dollar, pristine, white mega yacht pulls alongside you and hailed you by your full name with an electric megaphone.
It's absurd. It's like an alien abduction.
It really is.
But Keith stays loyal to his friend. He declines to just hop on the yacht immediately. He completes the voyage to Tahiti on the Maribel.
And when they finally part ways in port, Keith insists on paying Jack for the passage.
But Jack refuses the money, saying Keith did half the sailing and navigation anyway. So Keith gives him the ultimate gift. He gives Jack his prized miniature generator as a memento.
It's the first piece of modern machinery the Maribel has ever had.
It's a beautiful, reciprocal exchange of gifts. Jack gave Keith safe passage across the deadliest ocean on Earth. Keith gives Jack a piece of his own life's work, a piece of the Toolroom.
With that concluded, Keith finally boards the Flying Cloud, and the yacht takes over, transporting Keith to his final destination, the uninhabited island of Marotta.
The climax of the story. And once again, Shute defies every standard Hollywood trope.
He really does.
When Keith arrives at Marotta, there are no pirates waiting in ambush.
Yeah.
There are no rival treasure hunters. There is just the quiet, devastating reality of the coral reef and the wreckage of his sister's life.
Keith approaches the reef in the yacht's motor launch. Looking down through the clear water, he can physically see the rotting timbers of the shearwater trapped in the coral.
Just sitting there.
This was the exact same boat he stood on in the Hamble River in England just 6 months prior, drinking tea and chatting with his sister.
But Keith has a job to do. And he remembers the need for absolute secrecy. He can't just tell the crew of the billionaire's yacht, hey, I'm looking for 27,000 pounds in smuggled diamonds.
No, that would be a disaster.
So he employs his practical ingenuity one last time. He asks to borrow a heavy hammer and a cold chisel from the yacht's tool locker under the guise of salvaging the yacht's engine parts as a keepsake.
It's the perfect cover story because it is exactly what a sentimental engineer would do.
Exactly. He goes ashore alone, he wades out to the wreck at low tide, finds the concrete block still sitting securely in the bilge, and he uses the chisel to break away the top layer.
Exactly as he designed it to be broken months ago in his Ealing workshop, he extracts the copper box.
And then we get to this deeply moving, emotional climax. Again, there's no grand orchestral swell, no melodramatic screaming at the heavens. Keith finds where John and Joe washed ashore. He finds his sister's makeshift grave on the island.
And he has brought something with him all the way from England.
He brought the tiny gray wooden duck egg.
The one he made on his lathe for Janice on the very night he received the telegram that her parents were dead.
He speaks quietly to his sister's grave. He says, "It's the only thing I've got of hers to leave with you.
Yeah.
And Joe, I'll do my best, I promise that." And he buries the little wooden egg in the sand.
It is a monument to their love and a symbol of the promise he has kept.
He has traversed the globe, defied the odds, and navigated the Pacific not for glory, not for wealth, but simply to ensure that the small domestic world of his family remains intact.
It genuinely gives me chills.
It's so quiet, but so powerful. So, mission accomplished. He has the diamonds. The flying cloud whisks him back toward civilization.
But on the way back, they stop in America, and Keith finally meets the famous Solomon P. Herzone in person.
And Keith repays his massive debt to the billionaire, not with groveling, but with his core competency.
Which is so satisfying.
Herzone's about to sign a major business deal with Chuck Ferris, but he's unsure about the engineering specifics of it. What exactly is he consulting Keith on?
It's a deal involving a new type of marine engine or specialized lumber milling equipment. The exact specifics blend into the background.
Okay.
But the core issue is that Herzone needs an unvarnished, mathematically sound evaluation of the machinery before he commits millions of dollars.
And he trusts Keith implicitly.
Yes. Herzone asks Keith to look over the technical specs in a consultative capacity. Keith reviews the blueprints, uses his vast mechanical knowledge to spot the flaws and confirm the tolerances, and ensures the deal is physically sound.
He provides immense tangible value to these billionaires.
He does.
Which perfectly sets up his return to Ealing. He's back in the gray, rainy London suburbs. He walks into Mr. Carpenter's office looking tanned and fit from months at sea, and he casually drops a little jewel case on the solicitor's desk.
Mr. Carpenter opens it. Inside are exactly 47 uncut diamonds.
But they're covered in this strange yellow gummy deposit.
Which is the grease, oil, and mineral residue from being embedded in a concrete box in the bilge of a sunken ship for months.
Mr. Carpenter looks at the grime and asks if they've been stored in oil.
And Keith smoothly replies, "Not since yesterday."
And Mr. Carpenter, being a wonderfully tactful, perceptive British solicitor, realizes immediately what has happened.
He simply ignores the obvious physical evidence of international smuggling, asks no further questions, and accepts the diamonds into the trust for Janice.
Janice's future is completely secured. The 27,000 pounds is safe. But what about Keith and Katie? Did they just spend their last 110 pounds for nothing but a sunburn and a terrifying boat ride?
Far from it. As Keith is leaving the office, he casually informs Mr. Carpenter that he has to hurry to the bank before it closes.
To deposit a check for a consulting fee he earned on his quote-unquote holiday.
A fee of $17,000.
That's incredible.
Herzone paid him his standard executive consulting rate for his engineering advice on the business deal. Keith didn't just accept charity from the tycoon. He proved his professional worth on a global stage.
He acted as a legitimate, high-level consultant for a multi-million-dollar corporation, and he was compensated for his expertise.
He earned it. He absolutely earned every penny.
The quiet fitter from Ealing outnavigated the Pacific, retrieved a smuggled fortune, out-engineered the billionaires, and made it back in time for afternoon tea.
Having secured his niece's future and his own financial stability, Keith quietly returns to his workshop. He turns on the lathe, and he goes back to making models. He brings the story full circle.
It's just a perfectly constructed narrative. I want to shift gears slightly and talk about why this specific adaptation, the BBC Saturday Night Theatre version, works so incredibly well. Because adapting a reflective internal story like this to an audio format is incredibly challenging.
Oh, Saturday Night Theatre was a beloved BBC institution for over 50 years. They adapted novels and original plays, and they were masters of the medium.
Radio is an inherently intimate format. You are literally inside the listener's ear.
Right. For a story about quiet people, about subtle emotional shifts and internal problem solving, radio allows for a level of nuance that visual media sometimes obscures with flashy spectacle.
The sound design is a huge part of this. In the 1950s and 60s, the BBC Foley artists were absolute wizards.
They were.
The adaptation highlights the contrast in atmospheric sounds so perfectly. You have the high-pitched, steady, comforting buzzing of the Blee watchmaker's lathe in the Ealing workshop.
It sounds like a mechanical heartbeat.
And that sound is violently juxtaposed against the vast, lonely, howling sounds of the Pacific Storm, or the quiet, rhythmic lapping of water against the wooden hull of the Mary Bell.
And the vocal performances anchor that soundscape. Simon Lack, who plays Keith Stewart, delivers a masterclass in understatement.
He really does.
He never raises his voice in anger. He just projects this steady, unwavering competence. You can hear the decency in his tone.
And Nina Tuerta, as Jack Donnelly, brings this fantastic, loose, intuitive energy that perfectly contrasts with Keith's clipped precision.
It's the pacing, too. They don't rush from action set piece to action set piece. They let you sit in the cramped cabin with Keith and Jack as they discuss frigate birds and the mathematics of dead reckoning.
They let the tension build not from violence, but from the sheer logistical difficulty of moving a small boat across a massive map.
Which brings us to a really fascinating thematic lens to view this story through. Shute wasn't an explicitly religious writer, but this story resonates deeply with the concept of ordinary sanctity, an idea heavily championed by writers like G.K. Chesterton.
Ordinary sanctity. I love that phrase. Unpack that a bit. How does Chesterton's philosophy apply to a guy making model trains?
Well, Chesterton believed that heroism doesn't require a cape, a sword, or a battlefield. True heroism, true sanctity, is found in elevating the dignity of daily work.
Right.
It's found in honoring your marriage vows and showing up for your family and maintaining a home and in doing small, seemingly insignificant things extraordinarily well.
Doing small things extraordinarily well. That is Keith Stewart summarized in 6 words.
Precisely.
Whether it's turning a microscopic piston on a lathe so it perfectly thwart compression, or keeping a promise to a dead sister to raise her child. The level of care, the level of integrity is exactly the same.
The story argues that making a good clock is a moral act. Being a reliable uncle is a moral act.
Yeah.
And when a person who has dedicated their entire life to these quiet, ordinary virtues is suddenly tested by extreme, chaotic circumstances, they don't break. The habits of precision and honesty carry them through the storm.
It really makes you think about modern media. Why are humble heroes so rare today? We are constantly bombarded with anti-heroes, with cynical, deeply flawed, traumatized protagonists who are brilliant but toxic.
That's very true.
Why is basic human decency so often seen as boring by modern storytellers?
I think society has, in many ways, lost its appreciation for quiet craftsmanship. We currently live in a culture that values disruption over maintenance.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
We value volume over substance and virality over slow, steady competence. But when people encounter a story like Trustee from the Toolroom, it strikes such a deep chord because it reminds us of what actually holds the physical and social world together.
It's not the loud disruptors, it's the quiet maintainers, the decent people, the fitters.
So what does this all mean? If we step back and look at the bigger picture, what is the final takeaway from the journey of Keith Stewart?
That's the big question.
It's the profound reassurance that competence is, in fact, a superpower. Keith Stewart proves that you don't need to be loud or aggressive or ruthlessly ambitious to change the world or to move mountains.
Or in this case, to move multi-million-dollar mega yachts.
Exactly. You just need to be highly competent at what you do, you need to be uncompromisingly honest, and you need to be willing to help others without expectation of reward.
If you do those things, you build an invisible global bank account of goodwill that can save you when the storms eventually come.
I think that is incredibly profound.
It's not about being the loudest person in the room. It's about being the most useful.
Exactly right.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. We all live in a highly connected world today. Think about the hobbies, the niche interests, the online communities you are a part of. Whether it's a coding forum, a gardening group, an open-source software project, or a tabletop gaming server.
We'll have them.
Who is the Keith Stewart in your community? Who is that quiet person who patiently answers everyone's beginner questions, who writes the detailed tutorials, who fixes the broken links, and who keeps the machinery of your community running smoothly without ever asking for recognition or a spotlight?
And more importantly,
What would happen, and how would you respond if tomorrow they suddenly needed your help? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Nevil Shute's masterpiece. Look out for the quiet heroes in your own tool rooms.